There's something I keep coming back to when I think about Adventure Time, and it's this. The show understood that 1,000 years is a long time, but it never tried to make that feel dramatic. It just let it be heavy. The way a stone is heavy. The way a familiar song is heavy when you hear it in the wrong mood. Marceline the Vampire Queen is over 1,000 years old. She floats instead of walks, plays a bass guitar she made from her family's battle axe, and sustains herself not on blood, which would be the obvious choice, but on the colour red. She absorbs it from objects, strawberries, roses, the faded red of a sunset. The blood attracts her because of its colour, but she doesn't actually need it, which is one of those small details that says a lot about her, if you think about it for a while. And I have thought about it for a while. Quite a lot, actually. This video is going to be a long, slow wander through Marceline, her history, her philosophy, her songs, the relationships that shaped her, and the grief she's been carrying around since roughly the end of the world. We'll talk about Simon, we'll talk about her father, and her mother, and Princess Bubblegum. We'll talk about what it means to be immortal in a way that isn't glamorous, the way the show handles it, which is quietly and honestly, and with a great deal of care. There's something about Marceline specifically that makes her good company late at night. She's not a character who demands things from you. She's not trying to convince you of anything. She's just there, floating above her cave floor, playing something on her bass, existing in the dark with the comfortable ease of someone who has been doing it for a very long time. There's something restful about that, if you let it be. It's late, and there's no rush. If you're new here, and this kind of thing is your vibe, long relaxed dives into the characters and worlds you love, subscribing is always appreciated. But mostly, I just want to talk about Marceline for a while, because she's one of those characters who rewards the thinking. So, Adventure Time. If you've never seen it, it's an animated series that ran on Cartoon Network from 2010 to 2018, set in the post-apocalyptic Land of Ooo, a world rebuilt from the ruins of human civilization after something called the Mushroom War. It's technically a children's show in the way that it has bright colours and a talking dog. It is also, in practice, a show about time and loss, and the things people carry and the ways they cope with carrying them. Marceline is one of its main characters. She first appears in the opening episode of Season 1, where she evicts Finn and Jake from the tree fort they've been living in. First impression: mischievous, slightly chaotic, not particularly interested in explaining herself. She's not malevolent, she just does what she wants, and the consequences of that are your problem, not hers. That first impression is not inaccurate, but it is, to put it gently, incomplete. So let's start from the beginning, or as close to the beginning as we can get, with a character who's been around for a millennium. Pendleton Ward, the creator of Adventure Time, once said that Marceline was his favourite character specifically because he didn't know everything about her history. There was, in his words, a mysterious element to her, room that hadn't been filled in yet. And I think that instinct turned out to be one of the most important decisions the show made, because it meant that as more of Marceline's backstory was revealed over the years, it never felt like it was reducing her. It felt like it was deepening her. Each new detail made the existing ones more interesting rather than replacing them. That's harder to do than it sounds, with a character this old. She is 1,003 years old at the start of the series, give or take. She's been around long enough that she was alive before the Mushroom War, through the Mushroom War, through whatever came after it, through the slow rebuilding of something resembling a world, through centuries of the Land of Ooo, becoming what it is when we first see it. She's watched kingdoms rise and fall. She's watched friends age and die. She's watched the landscape itself change around her, century by century, while she stayed more or less the same, and she floats instead of walks. That's worth pausing on for a second, because it's such a specific choice. Floating is the default. Walking is the exception. She's not grounded in the way most people are. Not literally, not figuratively. She drifts. She sleeps floating. She travels floating. Even when she's in conversation with someone, she's usually a foot or two off the floor, which gives every scene she's in this quality of not quite belonging to the ground beneath her. Now, what is she exactly? And I say exactly with the caveat that the answer is not simple. Her father is Hunson Abadir, the ruler of the Nightosphere, a hell-adjacent demon dimension. He is, by most available metrics, an evil being. He consumes souls. He commands demons. He is, in his own words, completely evil, though the show later suggests this might partly be an effect of the amulet he wears rather than his baseline nature. Marceline is his heir, technically. She has no interest in that. Her mother is Elise, a human woman. She appears only in flashbacks, briefly in the Stakes miniseries, and with more emotional weight in the Distant Lands special Obsidian. She's quiet and warm, and she died a long time ago in circumstances Marceline didn't fully understand until centuries after the fact. We'll get to that. On top of the half-demon, half-human situation, Marceline is also a vampire, though not in the traditional sense. She didn't get turned by a single bite from a single vampire. She became a vampire queen the hard way, by hunting vampires across the post-apocalyptic wasteland, slaying them and absorbing their souls. And with the souls came their powers. She collected them. The floating ability, for instance, came from a vampire called the Fool. The regeneration came from the moon. Each vampire was a piece of a larger puzzle. She assembled herself into something new. That detail, that her vampirism is something she built out of the things she defeated, feels very her. It's a strange kind of self-creation. Then there's the bass. It started as a battle axe, a family heirloom from the Aberdeen line. At some point, Marceline turned it into an electric bass guitar. She plays it constantly. She writes songs on it. It's her primary mode of expression in situations where words feel inadequate, which, for Marceline, is most situations. There's a detail from Marcy and Hudson, a later season episode, where we learn that when her father first sees the instrument after being away for decades, he asks if she turned it into some kind of lute. He doesn't recognize what it is. A bass guitar would presumably not exist in any meaningful sense after the end of human civilization. So from his perspective, she's taken a weapon and made it into a stringed instrument he doesn't have a name for, which is sort of wonderful. She has, by the show's accounting, 5 bass guitars. One of them is acoustic. She plays a banjolele at one point. She has made music a central part of who she is across 1,000 years, which suggests it's not a hobby, it's closer to a necessity. When Rebecca Sugar joined the Adventure Time production team early in the show's run, the creative staff encouraged her to put her own experiences into the Marceline material. Sugar is an extraordinarily gifted writer and composer, and the episodes she worked on, particularly the ones involving Simon and the ones involving Princess Bubblegum, have a different emotional texture than the rest of the show. Not better, exactly, just more raw, more personal. You can feel someone putting something real into them. Ward designed Marceline's look, the long black hair that reaches to her feet, the grey-blue skin, the neck marks that presumably date from the bite that completed her vampirism. But Ward also said something I find genuinely interesting about her clothing. She wears different outfits in most of her episodes because girls own more than one outfit, which is such a small thing to notice and such a specific thing to fight for in a medium where female characters often wear the same costume forever. The practical consequence is that Marceline feels like a person living her life rather than an icon frozen in place. She usually dresses in shades of red and grey. The red is practical, she consumes it, but it's also the colour that runs through her whole visual identity. Red is what she needs. Red is what she wears. Red is the colour of the only song she ever wrote directly to her father. She first appears, as I said, in Evicted, where she kicks Finn and Jake out of the tree fort they've been living in. She does it with a sort of casual omnipotence. She shapeshifts. She floats. She's entirely unbothered by their attempts to resist. The episode treats her as the antagonist for most of its runtime before pulling back and revealing that she's not really a villain at all. She's just someone who's spent so long living outside of any society's rules that the rules don't really apply to her anymore. She's operating on a different logic. Her abilities, by the way, are genuinely remarkable, even by the standards of a show populated with magical beings and candy kingdoms and a dog who can change shape. She can shapeshift into almost anything. She can turn into a bat, which she does frequently. She can become a large, monstrous form when the situation calls for it. She can levitate indefinitely. She can become intangible. She has the vampire's enhanced strength and speed. And because she absorbed the powers of 5 distinct vampires during her hunting years, she has abilities beyond the standard vampire toolkit. The regeneration is particularly notable. The moon, one of the 5 named vampires from Stakes, had a regeneration power that Marceline absorbed. The ability to heal from essentially anything, as long as she returns to the shade in time. Direct sunlight is genuinely painful and dangerous to her, but not immediately lethal unless she's in it long enough and cannot retreat. She's described the sensation as comparable to scraping her knee, which is how you know she's been in enough actual pain that a scraping knee barely registers. On a bright day, she covers up, parasol, large hat, long gloves, and moves through the world slightly uncomfortably, but functionally. The reflection thing? Also real. She cannot see herself in mirrors. The show handles this practically rather than symbolically most of the time, but there's something there if you want to find it. A character who has genuine difficulty seeing herself clearly, who cannot access the most ordinary form of self-reflection, who has to be told by others how she appears. That does something over 1,000 years. She also has a feral state. When she doesn't consume enough of the color red, she goes hungry in a way that's genuinely dangerous. She becomes compulsive, driven, less herself. The hunger overrides the personality. It's worth mentioning because it's one of the ways the show makes her otherness real and specific rather than aesthetic. She's not a vampire for the atmosphere. There are actual requirements of her existence that create genuine complications, and she manages them with varying degrees of grace. What strikes me most about her, rewatching, is how she manages all of this. The power, the age, the accumulated history, the specific requirements of her nature, with what appears to be complete nonchalance. She floats around the Land of Ooo, doing what she likes. She plays music. She pulls pranks on people who probably deserve it, and some who don't. She projects an air of complete ease with herself that is, as the show slowly reveals, rather more constructed than it appears. The nonchalance is real. It's also, in part, armor. And there's something particular about how the show earns your investment in her. It doesn't ask you to care about her suffering. It asks you to find her interesting first, the floating, the bass, the red, the mischief. And then, once you're already interested, it shows you what's underneath. By the time you're watching I Remember You and trying to hold yourself together, you're already so far in that it's too late to be detached about it. That's good writing. That's how you build a character who matters. By the time the series was in its 4th and 5th seasons, that same character was the subject of some of the most emotionally complex storytelling in the show. That journey, from mischievous squatter in someone else's tree fort to the emotional center of the entire show, is what I want to trace tonight. Slowly. We have time. The Mushroom War is one of the show's great background presences. It's never shown directly. We see the aftermath, we see flashbacks to the immediate post-war period, we see what the land looked like when it was still raw and dangerous, but the war itself happens off-screen, 1,000 years before Finn and Jake are even born. What we know, it was a nuclear-scale conflict that destroyed human civilization. The fallout was severe enough to cause widespread mutation, the strange creatures that populate the Land of Ooo, the weird biology of everything, the way the world itself seems to have been fundamentally altered. All of that traces back to the Mushroom War and what it released. Human beings, as a recognizable species, largely didn't survive it. Marceline did. One of her earliest depicted memories, shown briefly in Memory of a Memory, is of a small child playing alone in the ruins of a city. Buildings on fire in the background, rubble everywhere, and this little girl, utterly alone, just playing. The image is quiet in a way that makes it more disturbing than it would be if it were loud. She survived the Mushroom War as a child. She was, at that point, just a little girl, half demon by blood, yes, but young and small, and utterly unprepared for the world that was left. She wasn't entirely alone to begin with, though. She had her mother. Elise, Marceline's mother, was human. We see them living together in a battered trailer in the desert in the Everything Stays flashback, one of the episodes of the Stakes mini-series. Elise is sitting with young Marceline, finishing the story of how she met Hunson Abadir. Marceline wants to go outside and play. Elise tells her it's nap time. Marceline complains that her dreams are weird, and Elise says, and this is a line I find myself thinking about more than I probably should, something weird might just be something familiar viewed from a different angle, which is, in hindsight, the philosophical key to the entire Stakes miniseries, and probably to Marceline's arc as a whole. but we'll get to that properly later. In that same flashback, Elise is clearly unwell. The show doesn't spell it out, but the implication is radiation sickness. She's been too close to whatever the Mushroom War released for too long. She's hiding it from Marceline so as not to worry her. She's doing what parents do, which is to protect their children from the full weight of how bad things are. What Elise does eventually is draw Marceline a map. The map leads to a clubhouse where there's supposedly a party happening. It's a distraction. It's a kindness. It's a way of getting Marceline to move in the direction of safety, in the direction of a fallout bunker that might keep her alive, while Elise herself is too sick to make the journey. Marceline follows the map. She goes looking for the party. She didn't see her mother again. There's a version of this story that gets told in a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction, and it's usually focused on the adults, on the people who lived through the thing and now have to rebuild. Adventure Time is interested in a different question. What about the children who lived through it? What does it do to you to have the world end when you're small enough that you don't have a clear memory of the world that existed before? Marceline has no real before. She has the ruins and the wandering and whatever she could put together from the pieces. And then she has Elise's voice in a recording she won't find for 1,000 years, and the faint trace of a kindness she spent centuries misreading as abandonment. And for centuries, not years, centuries, Marceline believed her mother had abandoned her. That's what the silence looked like from the outside. That's what it felt like to be a child who followed a map and found an empty bunker instead of her mum. The story she told herself was, she was left. And that story sat in her for 1,000 years before anyone corrected it. We find out the truth in Obsidian, the Distant Lands special that came out in 2020. Marceline finds a recording Elise left behind. We hear Elise's voice apologizing, explaining what really happened, finally reaching its intended listener roughly a millennium after it was meant to. I don't want to oversell it, because the show doesn't oversell it. It's handled quietly, the way the best things in Adventure Time are handled. But the weight of it, the idea of someone carrying a wound for 1,000 years that was based on a misunderstanding, is genuinely difficult to sit with. There's something philosophically interesting about that structure. The wound isn't the result of malice. Elise wasn't abandoning Marceline. She was trying to save her. But Marceline had no way of knowing that, and the person who could have explained it was gone, and so the story calcified. It became a fact about her past rather than a mystery with an answer. She absorbed it into her understanding of herself. That's how a lot of Marceline's wounds work, actually. They don't come from people who meant to hurt her. They come from people who couldn't help it, who were lost, or dying, or overwhelmed by forces larger than themselves, which doesn't make the wounds any smaller. It just makes them harder to be angry about. And there's something specific about surviving catastrophe as a child that the show handles carefully. Children who live through large, incomprehensible events, war, displacement, the sudden absence of the world that made sense, tend to make stories to explain what happened. The stories are often wrong in their specifics. They're based on the information available to a child, which is incomplete. Marceline had access to the story of what happened to Elise for about as long as it took to follow a hand-drawn map and find an empty building. That story, she left me, is the one she kept. For 1,000 years, because it was the only one available. After her mother was gone, Marceline was alone in the post-war wasteland. She wandered, she survived, she was a child with demon blood and the resilience that comes with that, navigating a world that had been designed for a species that had mostly stopped existing. The creatures that populated the ruins were dangerous and mutated. There was no infrastructure, no society, no one to tell her what to do or where to go. She kept moving. That instinct to keep moving, to not settle in one place for too long, becomes a pattern that follows her for centuries. She moves every time things get too still. She collects caves and houses and abandons them. She doesn't stay. And somewhere in the ruins of what used to be a city, a small half-demon child was walking alone. That's when she met someone. Simon Petrikov was, before everything went wrong, an antiquarian. He studied old objects. He tracked down rare and ancient artifacts with the specific energy of someone who finds that kind of thing genuinely delightful. He was 47 years old when the Mushroom War happened. He had a fiancée named Betty, whom he loved very much, and he had recently acquired a crown, a mysterious crown from Scandinavia, that he didn't yet fully understand. The crown gave him power over ice and snow. It also, gradually and then rapidly, destroyed his mind. I want to say a word about Simon Petrikov specifically, before we get into what happened to him, because I think he matters as a character in his own right, and not just as a function of what he means to Marceline. He's a scholar, a gentle one. He's curious about the world in the particular way of people who find things intrinsically interesting, not for their utility or their prestige, but just because knowing how things work is its own reward. He found a crown. He didn't know what it was. He studied it, because that's what he does. He wore it, because that's what you do with a crown when you want to understand it. He had no way of knowing what would happen, and what happened is he lost himself. Slowly, then all at once. And the tragedy of it, the reason it's so difficult to watch even obliquely, even through Marceline's telling of it, is that the man who disappeared was someone worth having around. Not because he was extraordinary in any world historical sense, just because he was kind. He pushed a small sick child across a ruined city in an office chair. He performed a whole episode of Cheers through an empty television frame. He stayed until he couldn't stay anymore. Each time he wore it, he became less himself. His appearance changed. His skin turned blue, his beard grew enormous, his nose elongated. His thoughts became fractured. He had visions. He experienced a kind of creeping dissolution of his personality, his memories, his identity. When he took the crown off, he didn't fully remember what he'd done while wearing it. He filmed video diaries of himself, shown to us in the episode Holly Jolly Secrets Party and Kuntu, when Finn and Jake accidentally find the Ice King's secret tapes, documenting what was happening to him. He's rational and frightened in those recordings. He knows something is wrong. He's trying to hold on to himself, trying to leave a record that makes sense, trying to stay Simon Petrikov for as long as possible. He doesn't entirely manage it. The video diaries are worth dwelling on for a moment, because they're doing something formally interesting. They're addressed to his fiancée, Betty, who is gone by this point, who left because the crown's effects became too frightening and too strange. He's filming himself talking to someone who isn't there, trying to explain something that doesn't have a good explanation, documenting his own deterioration with the scholarly instinct he can't seem to turn off, even as everything else falls apart. There's a detail in those tapes where he describes acquiring the crown, trying to explain its origins and properties, and he sounds exactly like the antiquarian he was. Methodical, curious, genuinely interested in the object even as it destroys him. The part of him that catalogued and annotated and tried to understand things is the last part to go, and even that, eventually, goes. What we're left with is the Ice King, a blue, bearded, long-nosed figure who lives alone in an ice kingdom with a penguin he calls Gunter, kidnapping princesses in the hopes that one of them will agree to marry him. He's lonely in the specific way of someone who has forgotten what he's missing. He knows there are gaps, he just can't access what used to fill them. The show, across its run, treats the Ice King with a consistent and careful compassion. He's ridiculous. He causes genuine problems. Finn and Jake have to deal with him regularly, but the show never forgets who he was, even when he has. And through the lens of the Simon and Marceline history, the ridiculous becomes tragic, and the tragic becomes unbearably specific. When the Ice King pursues princesses, when he asks over and over again, in increasingly desperate and inappropriate ways, for one of them to love him, the show is telling you. This is a corrupted echo of wanting Betty back. The crown took his ability to remember her name, her face, the specifics of her. What remained was the need itself, divorced from its object, and the need has been wandering around Ooo for 1,000 years, trying to find something to attach to. But in the immediate aftermath of the Mushroom War, before the transformation was complete, Simon was still mostly himself. And somewhere in the ruins, in what used to be a city that looks, based on architectural details in the show, rather like Los Angeles, he found a 7-year-old girl crying alone. He picked her up. He named her Marcy, which is what he called her. From then on, he became, in the absence of anyone else, her caretaker. The episode, Simon and Marcy, shows us a day in their lives together, roughly 996 years before the events of the series. It was written by Rebecca Sugar and Cole Sanchez, and the production team described the pitch to Cartoon Network as The Road Except for Kids, which I think tells you everything you need to know about the emotional register they were going for. In the episode, Marceline gets a mild fever. Simon decides she needs chicken soup. He finds an abandoned motorcycle. They nearly crash it, it explodes, and rather than let her walk the whole way to the nearest town, he finds an office chair with wheels and pushes her in it across the city. The entire way, because she's sick and he doesn't want her to be tired. That's who Simon Petrikov is. That's the kind of person he is before the crown takes him. He tries to make her laugh. He finds a broken television in an abandoned building, no screen, just the frame, and performs an entire episode of Cheers through it, acting out all the parts. She taps a can to indicate she wants him to go on mute. He mouths the words silently. She laughs. He's thrilled. He sings her the Cheers theme song, Where Everybody Knows Your Name. He uses it later as an anchor, something to recite to himself while wearing the crown to try to hold on to who he is. If I keep singing this, I'm still Simon. If I still know the words, I haven't completely gone yet. It doesn't work forever. By the end of the episode, after he's forced to use the crown to protect Marceline from a horde of mutant creatures, after he's knocked them all back and taken the crown off again, he tells Marceline he loves her and hugs her, and calls her Gunter. Gunter? The name the crown will eventually give all of his penguins. The name of someone who doesn't exist. It slips out, even with the crown off, even after he's fought his way back. He's further gone than he knew. Marceline doesn't understand what it means yet. She's 7 years old. She just hugs him back. What happens next, over the years that follow, is that Simon disappears further and further into the crown. He becomes erratic, he becomes dangerous, even if not intentionally. In Everything Stays, the second part of Stakes, we see a flashback of Simon filming what appears to be one of his final video diaries. He's essentially gone at this point. He leaves Marceline a note saying he'll arrange for someone to take care of her. He leaves, because he has to, because what's left of him is not safe to be around. And then, years and decades and centuries later, he is the Ice King. He doesn't remember Simon. He doesn't remember Marceline. He has a vague, damaged sense that there are things he's missing, but he can't access them. He seeks out a princess to marry, and the show suggests, heartbreakingly, that this is a corrupted echo of wanting Betty back, of the fiancée he lost before the end. He calls his penguins Gunter, an echo of the name he accidentally called Marcy at the end. The episode I Remember You is the one that brings this together explicitly, and it's one of the most quietly devastating things I've ever seen in a cartoon. Marceline comes to visit the Ice King. She has a collection of notes and letters, things Simon wrote to himself as he was losing his mind, documenting what was happening to him. She sings a song assembled from his own words. The Ice King listens and thinks the song is great, and doesn't recognize any of it as his own story. He's in the room. Simon is not. There's a line from the cultural gutter essay about this episode that I find very true. Marceline is the only one who remembers. She's the last living piece of Simon Petrikov in the world. And the Ice King will keep seeking her out, without knowing why, because some dim signal in him still knows there's something there, even though the thing itself is gone. That's the grief Marceline is living with. Not the clean kind, where someone dies and you mourn and eventually it becomes something you can live alongside. The kind where the person is still there, still walking around, still talking to you, but the person you actually loved is simply absent, and there's no resolution to that. There's no ending that makes it better. There's just the fact of it, which she carries. The episode Simon and Marcy, the one that shows us their time together in the post-war period, ends in the present day after Marceline has finished telling the story. The Ice King scores another basket. He doesn't remember any of it. Finn and Jake are quiet, and Marceline watches him, and the look on her face is not easily categorized. It's not simple sadness, and it's not simple acceptance. It's something more lived in than either. She's been looking at him like that for a very long time. For 1,000 years, she's been carrying that. Here's the thing about the bass guitar she made from the battle axe. It's a family heirloom. The Abadir battle axe, the weapon of a demon lord dynasty, is the thing she chose to transform into an instrument. She took something designed to destroy and made it into something designed to express. That's not subtle as a metaphor, I admit, but the show wears it lightly enough that it doesn't feel heavy-handed. It just feels like something Marceline would do, And the fact that she plays it constantly and writes songs on it and has apparently been playing it since at least her teenage years, there's something in that continuity that I find moving. The same object for 1,000 years. Simon noticed her music even as he was disappearing. In his video diaries, the ones Finn and Jake find accidentally, there's a moment where he says, with something like wonder in his voice, "Marceline's songs are so good." He's already losing himself by this point. He doesn't always know where he is or who he is. But he hears her playing, and it's still reaching him. And in Simon and Marcy, when Marceline hears him sing the Cheers theme for the first time, she says, "Your songs are so good." The same words, passed back and forth between them across time, one echo answering another. Music is the way Marceline processes things she can't say directly, which I think most people who've ever written a song, or kept a journal, or made anything out of a feeling they didn't know how to otherwise handle, will recognize immediately. The Fry song is the most famous example of this. It's from the episode It Came from the Nightosphere, and the lyric goes, "Daddy, why did you eat my fries? I bought them and they were mine. Maybe if I had more fries, you'd like me more, and you'd quit eating mine." That's it. That's the whole song, more or less. On the surface, ridiculous. A 1,000-year-old vampire queen is upset about her father eating her chips. And the show lets it be ridiculous on the surface, because the show is good. But the feeling underneath it, the specific humiliation of having something small in yours taken by someone who doesn't even register what they've done, and the way that small thing becomes a container for every time that person failed to see you, that's not ridiculous at all. Rebecca Sugar wrote that song. She wrote it for the first Marceline episode she worked on in the show's second season. The Fry song went on to be one of the most beloved pieces of music in the entire series, which I think says a lot about how well it articulates something real. Then there's I'm Just Your Problem from the episode What Was Missing. Marceline performs it for a group of people that includes Princess Bubblegum, and it's directed entirely at her. The surface level is sardonic. "I don't need you to treat me like a lady. I'm no princess. I don't need to be saved." It's dismissive. It sounds like it's saying, "You don't matter to me." It's one of the most obvious songs about still caring about someone that I've ever encountered. The sarcasm is so thick and so precisely constructed that it inverts itself entirely. You only write a song that specific about someone if they matter enormously. The dismissal is the tell, and everything stays, which we'll come back to properly. But for now, it's a lullaby, and it's about change, and Rebecca Sugar wrote it based on a memory of losing a stuffed animal in a garden and finding it a year later, bleached on one side from the sun, but otherwise exactly as she'd left it. Not better or worse. Different. The song appears first in Stakes as the lullaby Elise would have sung to Marceline, or that Marceline imagines she sang. It's somewhat dreamlike in context, and then at the very end of Stakes it comes back as the whole show returns to normal after everything Marceline has been through, which gives it a completely different weight the second time. The thing about Marceline's music is that it functions as a kind of private language that she sometimes lets other people hear. She doesn't explain herself in conversation. She tends toward deflection and misdirection in regular speech, the sort of casual avoidance that passes for personality when you've been alone long enough. But she writes songs that tell you everything, if you're paying attention. There's a song from the later series called Slow Dance With You that's worth mentioning in this context. It's soft and vulnerable in a way that most of Marceline's material isn't, and it's clearly written about Bubblegum, about wanting something tender and ordinary from someone she doesn't quite know how to ask for it from. It doesn't have the armour of "I'm just your problem." It's just there, unprotected. The songs evolve as she does. The early ones have walls. The later ones, less so. The axe base is the hinge point between weapon and expression. It's the thing that was meant to destroy that became the thing that communicates. I think that's probably not an accident. I think that's probably quite personal to her. And the fact that it's still, after everything, her dad's axe, that she kept it, transformed it, made it hers while keeping it traceable to where she came from, is its own kind of small, unspoken thing. She's playing on her father's weapon, and she's using it to say all the things she can't say to him directly. There's something almost elegant about that, in a complicated way. Right so, Hunson Abadir, he is the ruler of the Nightosphere, which is essentially a demon dimension, chaotic, soul-consuming, generously described as unpleasant. He is, by any reasonable metric, evil. He consumes souls. He commands demons. He is ancient and powerful and full of chaotic energy, and when he appears in the show, he tends to cause immediate problems for everyone around him. He is also voiced by Martin Olsen, who is Olivia Olsen's actual father. Olivia Olsen voices Marceline. Ward cast Martin without knowing who he was. He approached him separately and asked if he'd voice a character, and Martin agreed. The fact that Marceline's fictional father is played by her real father is one of those coincidences that feels almost too perfect to be accidental, even though it apparently was. When Hunson first appears in It Came from the Nightosphere, which is the second season episode that established this relationship, his dynamic with Marceline is immediately readable even before we know the backstory. She's frustrated with him. Not in the way you're frustrated with a villain, in the way you're frustrated with a parent who keeps missing the point. He eats her fries. He doesn't ask. He just sees them and eats them. And she sings him a song about it. The song is, as I mentioned in the last section, deceptively simple. Daddy, why did you eat my fries? I bought them and they were mine. Maybe if I had more fries, you'd like me more, and you'd quit eating mine. It's specific to the point of absurdity. That specificity is what makes it work. The fries are a stand-in for a feeling that's much larger and harder to articulate. The feeling of someone not noticing what belongs to you. The feeling of being overlooked in small ways, repeatedly, by someone whose noticing would mean a great deal. What Hunson does, when Finn plays the recording of the song back to him during the episode's climax, is stop. The rampage stops. He listens. He looks at Marceline with something in his face that is, unmistakably, a parent who has just understood that he hurt his child and didn't know. He manages to tell her he loves her before being sent back to the Nightosphere. The moment is real, it's brief, and it's followed immediately by the chaos of the episode's resolution, but it's real. Here's what's interesting about Hunson's arc across his 3 episodes in the original series. It follows almost exactly the same structure each time. In It Came from the Nightosphere, Marceline resents him, chaos happens, he shows he cares, she's briefly moved, he goes home. In Daddy's Little Monster, Marceline resents him, chaos happens, he shows he cares, she's briefly moved, he goes home. In Marcy and Hunson, Marceline resents him, chaos happens, he shows he cares, she's briefly moved, he goes home. A reviewer pointed this out, slightly exasperatedly, as a failure of the show to develop the character. But I actually think this is exactly right. This is what the relationship with a disappointing parent looks like. Not 3 different kinds of progress. The same cycle, repeated, the same small moment of connection, insufficient, receding, the same distance, resuming. Hunson isn't malicious toward Marceline, he loves her in his way. He just doesn't know how to show up for her in any way that changes things. He shows up for her crisis and then leaves. He attends her concert and causes a brawl, and then says something embarrassing about grandchildren. He's trying, arguably. He's just trying in ways that don't land. There's a detail in Marcy and Hunson that recontextualizes him a little. A flashback reveals that when Simon was finally leaving, when the crown had taken enough of him that he knew he couldn't stay with Marceline safely anymore, he told her he'd arrange for someone to come take care of her. That person was Hunson, so Hunson did come. After Simon left, Hunson showed up. We see in Memory of a Memory that teenage Marceline was spending time with her father, living in the ruins of a diner somewhere. He's present, at least intermittently, and then he ate her fries. I don't say that to diminish it. I say it because the small betrayal and the larger presence existing simultaneously is very true to how complicated family can be. He was there. He was also the kind of there that leaves you feeling alone anyway. One more detail worth mentioning, the battle axe she turned into a base was originally his. The family heirloom weapon. She took his weapon and made it into her instrument. That's been sitting there the whole time. She took something of his and remade it into something that let her express herself in ways she couldn't around him. The base is both connected to him and entirely her own. Both things at once, which is, honestly, a pretty accurate description of what it feels like to be someone's child when that relationship is complicated. There's a moment in Marcy and Hunson that I keep thinking about. Near the end of the episode, after all the chaos and the ghost brawl and the general catastrophe of having Hunson Abadir at your concert, Marceline thanks him. She thanks him for trying to support her, even though he made a scene, even though everything went wrong. She acknowledges the intention underneath the execution. That's enormous, actually. That's a very hard thing to do, to see someone clearly enough to recognize that they tried, while also recognizing that their trying kept going wrong in ways that were real and damaging and not acceptable to simply dismiss. Marceline does it without making it a grand reconciliation, without resolving anything that hasn't been resolved. She just says, "I know you were trying. Thank you for trying." And then he asks if she's going to have kids, and the moment is immediately undercut, which is probably exactly what that kind of conversation feels like in real life. The tenderness survives about 8 seconds before normality reasserts itself. That's them. That's probably always going to be them. And she's made a kind of peace with that. There's a scene in Everything Stays, the second episode of Stakes, that I think about more than almost anything else in the show. Young Marceline is lying with her head in her mother's lap. Elise, that's her mother's name, Elise, is finishing a story. The story of how she met Hunson Abadir, which is presumably quite a story, though we only catch the end of it. Marceline wants to go outside and play. Elise tells her it's nap time. Marceline says her dreams are weird, that she doesn't like them, and Elise says something weird might just be something familiar viewed from a different angle. It's such a quiet thing to say. And in the context of Stakes, where Marceline is in the middle of confronting her own history, re-examining things she thought she understood, finding different angles on her own story, it lands as the thematic center of everything. The whole mini-series is Marceline learning to view her history from a different angle. The weird thing, viewed differently, becomes recognizable. The wound becomes, if not healed, then at least understood. Elise was a human woman in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The show doesn't tell us much about how she and Hunson met. We get the tail end of that story, and then nothing else. What we know is that she survived the Mushroom War with her daughter, and she kept them alive in the desert, in a trailer, with whatever came to hand. She's depicted with a gentleness that the show doesn't overdo. She's not sentimentalized into something perfect. She's a person who is clearly unwell, clearly trying to hide it, clearly making the best decisions she can with the information she has. In Obsidian, the 2020 Distant Land special, Marceline finds a recording Elise left behind, a voice message, essentially, from before the end. Elise explains what she was actually doing when she drew the map. The clubhouse was a fallout bunker. The party was safety. She was directing Marceline towards survival because she knew she wasn't going to make it herself, and she didn't want her daughter to watch her die. The recording is apologetic and warm and utterly heartbroken. Elise knew that what she was doing would look from the outside like abandonment. She did it anyway because the alternative was worse. Marceline hears this roughly 1,000 years after it was made. I keep coming back to the structure of that misunderstanding and what it cost her. A child follows a map, finds an empty place, looks around for her mother, and decides, because there's no other obvious explanation, that her mother left on purpose. That's the story she has to tell herself. It becomes, over centuries, less a story and more a fact about herself. Her mother left. That's who she is, someone whose mother left. And then the truth arrives. Not better than the lie, exactly. Still a loss, but a different kind of loss. One that doesn't have to include the part where she was not worth staying for. There's something philosophically heavy in the gap between those two versions of the story, because the woman who spent 1,000 years believing she was abandoned and the woman who finds out she was protected are, in every observable sense, the same woman. The same memories, the same history, the same century after century of the same wound. Only the meaning changes, and meaning, it turns out, is not a small thing. It's almost everything. The wound shaped her. Not just in the abstract sense that all our history shapes us. In the specific, traceable sense that you can follow the thread of "my mother left me" through the whole of Marceline's psychology and see where it goes. The moving, the not settling, the difficulty with dependence, the particular way she holds people at a careful distance and then, when the distance hurts enough, builds enormous elaborate walls of sarcasm and detachment around the hurt. All of it flows, at least in part, from a map and a clubhouse, and a mother who was dying and didn't want her daughter to watch. Elise only appears in flashbacks. She never gets a full episode. The show gives her just enough screen time to be genuinely present without over-explaining her. We know what we need to know. She loved her daughter, she was dying, she made a hard choice, and the choice looked wrong from the outside for 1,000 years before it was understood. One detail that's worth mentioning, just as a small quiet thing, Elise is voiced in the flashbacks by Rebecca Sugar. Not a professional voice actor hired for the role, the show's own writer and composer. The person who put so much of herself into Marceline's character speaks the words of Marceline's mother. I don't know if that was a deliberate choice with a specific meaning attached to it, but it feels like one. Obsidian is the second of the 4 Adventure Time Distant Land specials, released on HBO Max in 2020. It's set after the end of the original series. Marceline and Princess Bubblegum are together explicitly in a relationship that the show spent 8 years building toward and then finally let exist. They're living together. They've settled into something. And then they get a call from a glass kingdom that's being threatened by a dragon. Not just any dragon, a dragon Marceline defeated a long time ago, centuries ago, during her wandering years, by singing a specific song at it. The song turned the dragon to glass. Marceline defeated the dragon, and then she left, and she never quite dealt with what the defeat had cost her. The episode structures itself as a road trip, Marceline and Bubblegum driving through the landscape, visiting the glass kingdom, sorting out the dragon situation, while layering in flashbacks that show us how they first met, how their relationship developed, and how it fell apart before eventually finding its way back together. The first meeting is everything the show implies it should be. 2 unusual people in an unusual world, recognizing something in each other. A young Bonibel Bubblegum, not yet the princess, not yet the ruler, still figuring out who she is, and Marceline, a vampire queen in her wandering years, not much older in appearance, but carrying centuries more weight. They found each other in a period when both of them were essentially alone. The falling out comes later. The show doesn't reduce it to a single moment or a single person's fault, which is the honest thing to do. Bubblegum was becoming more the leader she felt she had to be, more controlled, more guarded, more the ruler of the Candy Kingdom, and less the person Marceline had first known. Marceline was hurt by the distance and didn't have the language for it. The song Monster is what happened in the middle of that falling out. Marceline wrote it and sang it in anger, directed at Bubblegum. We hear it in flashback and we see Bubblegum hear it for the first time, and her expression is, there's no other word for it, devastated. The song is doing what Marceline's songs always do, saying the thing she couldn't say in conversation, but saying it in a form that can wound. The dragon, it turns out, was sleeping in a cave in the vicinity when Marceline sang that song. The song turned it to glass. The dragon spent centuries becoming a geological feature of the landscape, and the people who eventually built the Glass Kingdom didn't know there was a dragon underneath. Marceline's grief, weaponized by accident, left behind to become someone else's problem. What I find interesting about the episode's resolution is that it doesn't let Marceline defeat the dragon again using anger. She tries and it doesn't work. The scream that defeats the dragon has to come from something real, something true, and the song of anger and hurt isn't true anymore, not in the same way. Something has changed. What she sings instead is different, warmer, still honest, but honest about different things. It works. And also, in this episode, she finds her mother's recording. It arrives in the middle of everything else, which is very Adventure Time, honestly, the way it distributes its emotional revelations across the business of a plot. And Marceline learns what Elise was trying to do when she drew the map. It's handled with restraint. The show doesn't pause everything to make sure you've processed it. It gives you the moment and then continues. The title is doing a lot of work here. Obsidian is volcanic glass, formed from something extremely hot, cooled quickly, turned into something hard and sharp and transparent enough to see through, but not to see into easily. It's also the material that encases the dragon. It's also, arguably, a metaphor for what Marceline has been doing with the more painful parts of her history. Encasing them, hardening them, leaving them in place, but not dealing with them. The episode is about learning to deal with them, to sing a different song, to recognize that the wound calcified into anger is still a wound, and that the anger doesn't have to be the last word. There's a recurring quality to how Marceline uses anger in the show that Obsidian addresses directly. The anger is real, she doesn't manufacture it for effect, but it's also often a layer, something on top of the actual feeling, which is usually hurt or fear, or a need that she can't bring herself to name out loud. The Fry song is technically about chips, but actually about feeling invisible. I'm Just Your Problem is technically sardonic, but actually about longing. Monster is technically rage, but actually about grief at something she felt she'd lost. The dragon is, in some sense, the physical consequence of Marceline using her art as a weapon when her art really wanted to be a wound. The scream that defeated it the first time came from a real place. It was real anger, genuine hurt, but the anger was covering something softer underneath. The second song, the one that works at the end of Obsidian, comes from a different place. It comes from the softer thing. Obsidian is also the episode where the Bubblegum relationship is fully and unambiguously canon. A kiss early in the episode that the show had been carefully not showing for 8 years. I have some feelings about how long that took, and I imagine most people who watch the original series do too. But the way the episode handles what they are to each other feels earned, which is not always guaranteed when a show finally delivers on something fans have been waiting for. What the episode understands, which I think is the right thing to understand, is that the relationship isn't a reward at the end of a story. It's just the next thing. The show isn't over. Their lives continue. The dragon is sorted out. The mother's recording is found. The Glass Kingdom survives. And they drive home and presumably have dinner. The relationship existing doesn't resolve everything. It just means they're doing all the rest of it together. Before I can properly talk about Marceline and Bubblegum, I need to talk about Bubblegum herself for a bit, because the relationship only makes sense if you understand who she is, what she wants, what she fears, how she moves through the world. Princess Bubblegum, Bonibel Bubblegum, if you want to be formal about it, is 827 years old at the start of the series. She's younger than Marceline, though the gap looks strange from the outside, because Marceline appears to be a teenager, and Bubblegum appears to be about 17. She was created, not born, from a sentient candy entity called the Mother Gum, which is exactly as strange as it sounds. She essentially built the Candy Kingdom from scratch. She is its creator and its ruler and its primary scientist and its occasional tyrant. The central paradox of Bubblegum, which the show takes seriously without entirely resolving, is that she is both genuinely compassionate and genuinely controlling. She loves her citizens. She also surveils them. She built a police state to protect people she cares about, and the show doesn't pretend this isn't what she did. It's one of her character flaws, and she knows it, and she keeps doing it anyway, because her other character flaw is being unable to let go of control, even when she understands why she should. She's been watching civilizations come and go for centuries. She's seen the Land of Ooo go through enormous changes, the kind of changes that tend to end badly for the people caught in them. Her drive to protect her kingdom is real, and her methods are sometimes genuinely troubling, and both of these things are simultaneously true. The show holds them in tension rather than resolving them. One analysis I came across framed it this way: if Marceline's problem is the past, then Bubblegum's is the future. Marceline is stuck because she can't process what's behind her. Bubblegum is stuck because she can't stop anticipating and trying to control what's ahead. They're oriented in opposite directions. Maybe that's part of why they fit together. Their first meeting, shown in Obsidian, is everything the show implies it should be. Two solitary people in a strange world, finding each other. A young Bonibel who is still forming herself, still figuring out who she is outside of what she's building. And Marceline, older but no less adrift. Wandering as she always was, but finding something worth staying near. They met before the Candy Kingdom was what it is now, before Bubblegum had become fully the ruler, the scientist, the careful and slightly terrifying protector, before all of that crystallized into its final form. And in that earlier time, she and Marceline were just two people, keeping each other company in a world that didn't have much company to offer. What was missing is the episode from the original series that launched 1,000 fan essays. It aired in 2011. A magical door lord steals things that are personally significant to each character, and they have to think about what they truly want back to open the door. Marceline's most prized possession is a t-shirt of Bubblegum's, a rock band shirt, worn and soft, the kind of thing that gets that quality from being worn often. When she gets it back, she holds it and doesn't say anything about what it means. She doesn't have to. She also, in that episode, performs "I'm Just Your Problem" directly to Bubblegum. The sarcasm is not subtle. The emotion underneath the sarcasm is even less subtle, if you're looking for it. Olivia Olson confirmed in an interview at some point after the episode aired that Marceline and Bubblegum used to date. Cartoon Network, being Cartoon Network in 2011, asked for the comment to be walked back. The episode itself was quietly scrubbed from some streaming platforms for a period. The show continued for several more seasons, threading the needle carefully, coding the relationship in ways that were legible to adults without being explicit enough to cause trouble with the network. It's frustrating in retrospect, though the Distant Land specials, free from the original network constraints, finally let the relationship exist fully. The final season of the original show ends with a kiss. Obsidian opens with them living together, comfortable, happy, the long, complicated road already behind them. What I find interesting about the Bubbleline dynamic, beyond the emotional specifics of it, is what it represents philosophically in the context of the show. Adventure Time is a series about people who endure, who outlast the things that were supposed to destroy them. Bubblegum has been watching civilizations come and go for centuries, building and rebuilding, trying to protect what she's made. Marceline has been moving through the world for 1,000 years without a reason to settle. They are each other's reason to settle. Not in a saccharine way, not in the way a story wraps everything up neatly. They're still complicated people, with complicated histories, and the occasional tendency to handle their feelings very badly. But they've found something worth building toward together, and that means something real. What their relationship represents, in terms of Marceline's story, for someone who has spent a millennium watching everyone she loved disappear, either dying or fading away like Simon, or simply moving on, Bubblegum is the one who stays. Bubblegum is also roughly immortal, or close enough. She'll still be there. That's not nothing. For someone whose history with love is almost entirely a history of loss, the prospect of someone who might actually still be around in 50 years, in 500 years, is probably more than she lets herself show. Stakes begins with Marceline doing something that is, on its face, completely unreasonable. She's standing in the desert with a single tree, the only shade available, and she's pulled the entire thing out of the ground so she can carry it with her. She needs shade because she's a vampire, and direct sunlight is genuinely uncomfortable. She's walking across the desert carrying a tree. This is the opening image of the mini-series, and it tells you immediately where the show's head is at. Here is someone solving her problems with more effort than strictly necessary, because asking for help hasn't been her default. She eventually arrives at Princess Bubblegum's temporary residence. Bubblegum has, at this point in the story, been dethroned by her uncle Gumbald, and is living more simply than she's used to. And Marceline asks for a favour. She wants Bubblegum to use a machine she's been developing, a vampirism extraction device, to remove Marceline's vampirism. She wants to be mortal again. She wants to grow up. On the surface, the metaphor reads clearly. Vampirism as arrested development. A teenager frozen in place, unable to age, unable to change, running in circles because she's never learned how to move forward. The mini-series is going to be about Marceline overcoming that. Simple enough. Except it's not quite that simple, and the show knows it. The machine works, the vampirism is extracted. But extracting the vampirism means releasing the vampire souls Marceline absorbed, one by one, during her years of hunting them in the post-war wasteland. Each of the 5 named vampires she defeated, the Fool, the Empress, the Hierophant, the Moon, the Vampire King, is now loose in the world again. Each one needs to be confronted and defeated again, which means that before she can let go of her vampirism, she has to go back through the history of how she acquired it. Each vampire is a chapter of her past that she hasn't fully processed. Each one she faces is a piece of herself that she's been carrying without examining. The Fool represents the early post-war years, the wandering, the impulsive recklessness of a young person with no one to answer to. The floating power came from him. She defeated him as a teenager, alone, and scratched a tally mark into her base. The Moon represents the longer solitude, the regeneration, the way she kept healing from things that should have stopped her, because being unable to stop was all she had. The Vampire King is more complex. He's not simply a villain in the stakes framework, he's mournful, and the show gives him something resembling depth before he becomes the final crisis. He didn't choose to be the Vampire King any more than Simon chose to become the Ice King. He was shaped by what happened to him. Marceline recognizes that, and it complicates the fight. During her brief mortality, Marceline has dreams. The show shows us what she imagines her mortal life might have looked like. She visits an older Simon, a restored Simon, living with a still-present Betty. She grows old alongside Bubblegum, who remains ageless while Marceline reaches the end of a human lifespan. She imagines what it would mean to have a death that comes naturally, at the end of a full life, with the people she loves present. These are such gentle images. The show handles them without sentiment, doesn't tell you how to feel about them, just shows them and lets you sit with them. What Marceline wants when she's mortal is not adventure or freedom. It's the ordinary things, the aging, the end, the first dream, Simon and Betty, old together. Simon restored to himself, not the Ice King. They've had decades. They look happy in the particular ordinary way of people who have managed to make a life. Marceline is visiting them, and she's aging too. She's mortal in the dream. She's getting older. She gets to grow alongside people she lost. Nothing dramatic, just there they are, and there she is, and none of the terrible things happened the same way. The second dream, Marceline, elderly, at the end of her life, and Bubblegum there beside her, still young, still pink, unchanged. Because Bubblegum doesn't age the way Marceline would if she were mortal. Bubblegum would outlive her by centuries. But in the dream, she's there, holding her hand, present for the end of a mortal life, surrounded by love. That's what the heart underneath all of it wants. Just that. The dark cloud at the finale of Stakes. The Vampire King's essence has become something enormous and dangerous, threatening everything. Rather than let it destroy what she's built and who she loves, Marceline flies into it. She absorbs it back into herself. She becomes the Vampire Queen again. She doesn't become mortal again by overcoming her vampirism. She becomes more herself by accepting it, by understanding what it is and where it came from and what it cost her to acquire it. She goes back to being a vampire, but differently. She knows what she is now. She's not running from it. One analysis I found put it in a way that stuck with me. The metaphor the show initially sets up is that vampirism equals trauma, and the cure is removing it. But the actual thing the show says is that you can't remove trauma with a machine. Anyone who's lived with something long-standing and difficult recognizes that. You can't extract it cleanly and leave the rest of yourself intact. You have to go through it. You come out still carrying it, but you know it better. It has less power to surprise you. The final image of Stakes is Marceline singing Everything Stays as the world of Ooo returns to normal. Candy Kingdom restored, friends safe, everything roughly as it was, and everything different, in the small ways that matter. Rebecca Sugar joined Adventure Time as a staff writer and storyboard artist early in the show's run, and the episodes she worked on have a distinctly different emotional texture to the rest. Not better, I want to be careful about that. The show had extraordinary talent throughout its run, and the work was consistently good, but the episodes with Sugar's fingerprints on them have a quality of personal exposure that's recognizable once you know to look for it. She worked on It Came from the Nightosphere, which introduced the Fry song. She worked on What Was Missing, which gave us I'm Just Your Problem. She co-wrote and storyboarded I Remember You, which is the Simon and Marceline episode, and her final contribution to Adventure Time before leaving was Simon and Marcy, which she co-wrote and co-storyboarded with Cole Sanchez. After that, she left to create Steven Universe, which is its own extraordinary thing and probably deserves its own video. The production team specifically encouraged her, when she started working on Marceline episodes, to put her own experiences into the character. Sugar has spoken publicly about her own identity. She's bisexual and non-binary, and she's discussed how her own experiences with queerness, with belonging, with the complexity of family, informed her writing on the show, and then even more so on Steven Universe. You can feel it. It's not that the Marceline up Bubblegum dynamic is a coded autobiography. It's more that the emotions are real. The songs don't have the slightly artificial quality that can sometimes creep into music written by someone who hasn't felt what they're describing. They sound like someone who has actually been there. The origin of Everything Stays is one of those creative stories I find genuinely affecting. Sugar, during the storyboarding of the Everything Stays episode, couldn't write the lullaby for the scene between Marceline and her mother. The storyboard artist Hannah Nystrom flagged it to showrunner Adam Muto, who reached out to Sugar, even though she'd already left the show at this point, and asked if she'd be willing to write it. She agreed. She based it on a memory of losing a stuffed animal in a garden as a child. A year later, she found it. The sun had bleached the exposed surfaces, but the underside was unchanged. Still the same colour, still the same texture. She described the experience. It wasn't better or worse than when she'd left it, just different. And it was the first time she'd understood, at a visceral level, that things change even when they're left alone, even when they stay completely still. Everything stays right where you left it. Everything stays, but it still changes, ever so slightly, daily and nightly, in little ways when everything stays. The song is doing several things at once. It's a lullaby that Elise might have sung to young Marceline, soft and repetitive, designed for sleep. It's also the philosophical thesis of the entire Stakes miniseries. Things change whether or not you try to hold them still. The attempt to freeze things doesn't stop change. It just removes you from it. And when everything stays, in the sense of still being present, it doesn't stay the same. It changes anyway. The stuffed animal is a perfect image for this. It was there. It changed. It was still there. Marceline is there. She has changed across 1,000 years in ways she often can't see because she's inside them. She's still there. What I find remarkable about Everything Stays as a piece of writing is how much it manages to contain. A mother singing to a daughter, a vampire queen examining her own history, a philosophy of time and change, and the stubbornness of things that endure, all of it in under 2 minutes, mostly in one repeated melody, with lyrics that are simple enough that a child can understand them, and complex enough that you can think about them for years. Sugar is extraordinarily good at that. The songs that seem simplest, Everything Stays, the Fry song, I'm Just Your Problem, are doing the most. The plainness is the work. And there's something worth noting about what it means for a show to have its most emotionally resonant material written by someone who was putting themselves into it. Adventure Time was full of talented people who cared about what they were making, but the Marceline episodes that Sugar worked on have a particular quality of exposure, of something real being offered rather than something performed. That quality is hard to manufacture. You can recognize it when you encounter it, even if you can't always say exactly what it is. Her departure from the show after Simon and Marcy left a genuine mark on what the series was able to do afterward. Not that what came after wasn't good. The show remained excellent throughout its run, and the people who continued Marceline's story did extraordinary work. But the specific register of those sugar-written episodes, it came from the Nightosphere. What was missing? I Remember You, Simon and Marcy, has a quality that's worth naming as exceptional rather than simply as part of a consistently high standard. The show knew what it had in those episodes. It never tried to replicate them exactly. It just let them stand and built outward from what they established. There's a kind of immortality story that's essentially glamorous. The vampire who's seen everything, met everyone, and therefore has this sweeping perspective and enormous accumulated wisdom. It's romantic, that version. The centuries feel like a gift. Marceline's immortality doesn't feel like that. It feels more like a condition you manage. She's over 1,000 years old, and she still acts, in a lot of ways, like a teenager. Not because she hasn't grown, she has clearly, but because the growth happened slowly and unevenly in a world that kept offering her reasons to stop. The show is honest about this. The Stakes miniseries describes her as a messed up kid who couldn't process all that had happened to her. That's blunt, but it's not inaccurate. The centuries didn't automatically produce wisdom. They produced accumulated weight, which is a different thing. The comparison with Simon is worth returning to here. Simon forgot. The crown took his memory, his identity, his ability to carry what had happened to him. In some ways, the forgetting protected him from the full weight of the loss. He doesn't know what he had with Marceline, doesn't know what he lost when he lost himself, doesn't know that he was once someone who pushed a sick child across a city in an office chair because he didn't want her to be tired. The forgetting is tragic. It's also, in a very specific way, a mercy. Marceline remembers everything. She has been alive for 1,000 years, and she carries all of it. Every person who died, every place she lived and left, every version of the world that existed and then stopped existing. Simon, her mother, the wandering years in the ruins, the centuries, all of it, intact, just sitting there. Hambo is worth mentioning here. It's Marceline's childhood stuffed animal, a small bear given to her by Simon during the years they spent together after the Mushroom War. She held on to it for centuries. In the episode Sky Witch, we learn that she once traded something extraordinarily valuable to get Hambo back. Specifically, she traded Princess Bubblegum's old rock t-shirt, the shirt we know she kept as her most prized possession, for its connection to Bubblegum, to retrieve Hambo from the witch who had it. So she gave up the thing she valued most connected to the present to recover the thing she valued most connected to the past. That's a choice that says a great deal about how she relates to both. She's been carrying Hambo and everything Hambo represents for roughly 1,000 years. She's been carrying the t-shirt and everything it represents for however many centuries she and Bubblegum have had between them. These are anchors. Not to a pleasant past exactly. Hambo is connected to a time of extraordinary loss, but to the reality that things were real, that Simon was real, that the care he gave her happened even though he's gone. People keep things when everyone they've loved has left to maintain the evidence that the loving happened. That's not complicated as a psychological insight. It's probably something most people have experienced in smaller doses, but for Marceline, the scale of it is vertiginous. She's been maintaining that evidence for longer than most human civilizations have existed. There's also the question of watching people age. Finn is the most visible example in the original series. He starts as a 12-year-old boy and ends as a young adult. Marceline has been friends with him across his entire adolescence, and in the background of that friendship is the implication that she'll be here long after he's gone. The show doesn't dwell on this. It's not that kind of show, but it's present as a fact about who she is and who he is, and the gap between them. An alternate universe sequence in Finn the Human shows an older Marceline in a timeline where the Lich never existed. She's voiced in this brief scene by Cloris Leachman, who was in her 90s at the time of recording. The older Marceline still exists, still endures, in a different version of the world, which is strange and touching in equal measure. And then there's the specific quality of watching someone become someone else, which is different from watching someone age. The Simon situation is the most acute version of this, but it's not the only one. Bubblegum changes across the show's run, becomes more controlling, then works to become less so. Friends move away or grow or change. The Land of Ooo itself changes. Marceline has been a constant in a world that keeps recomposing itself around her, which is its own strange kind of isolation even when you're surrounded by people. She manages it, mostly, with the particular coping mechanism of people who have been alone a long time. She makes herself comfortable in her own company. The cave house, the base, the long nights playing music to no one. She built herself a life that doesn't require other people to function, so that when other people leave, as they always do, eventually, she's not left with nothing. The show, I think, is interested in whether that's admirable or sad. The honest answer is probably both. Adventure Time is generally interested in this question, actually. The distinction between solitude that sustains and solitude that keeps you stuck. Several of its major characters navigate it. Bubblegum retreats into her work, her kingdom, her projects, in ways that protect her, but also isolate her. Simon retreated into the crown, literally, in a way that was supposed to protect Marceline, but destroyed him. Marceline retreated into movement, into the transient, into the provisional. The show's answer is not that solitude is wrong, it's that solitude has to eventually become a choice rather than a default. You have to be alone enough that being with people is something you want, not just something that happens to you. And then you have to be brave enough to let it happen. Marceline gets there. Slowly, over 1,000 years, which is admittedly a long time, to figure it out, but she gets there. Since we're on the topic of what she holds on to and lets go of, That's probably a good place to move from here into the question of what she actually is, underneath everything she's accumulated. There's a classic piece of vampire mythology that the show uses in an interesting way. Vampires can't see their own reflection in a mirror. For most vampire stories, this is just a visual effect. For Marceline, it's also, if you're inclined to read into things, a pretty apt metaphor. She's genuinely bad at seeing herself clearly, not in the self-deprecating way that people sometimes perform, in the more literal sense that her self-perception is frequently unreliable. She dismisses the things she feels as unimportant. She describes her own music as not a big deal. She maintains in conversation a kind of default sardonic distance from anything that might reveal how much she actually cares about things. The songs say something different, but songs are easier. You can write the truth in a song and then stand in front of people and perform it, and still, somehow, have plausible deniability about whether any of it was real. What she is, technically, half demon through her father, half human through her mother, and vampire through 1,000 years of hunting and absorbing and surviving. That's 3 distinct ontological categories layered on top of each other, and none of them fit cleanly. As a half-demon, she's heir to the nightosphere, technically. She has demon powers that go beyond the strictly vampiric. She can transform into various forms, large, bat-like, monstrous if necessary. She's genuinely formidable, but she has no interest in ruling anything, no interest in soul consumption, no interest in the nightosphere's agenda. That lineage is hers by blood, and she doesn't particularly want it. As a half-human, the humanity is buried. But it's there. Stakes makes this visible. During her brief mortality, something shifts. She's more tethered to the ground, more aware of physical discomfort and warmth, and the small specifics of a body that ages. The human side of her seems to surface when the vampire aspects are stripped away, and what it wants, when it does, is ordinary things. Chicken soup, company, a quiet death at the end of a long life. As a vampire, assembled, as I mentioned earlier, from the vampires she hunted. She built her vampirism herself, piecing it together from the powers she absorbed. Which means there's no single point of origin, no one vampire who turned her. She turned herself, more or less, through 1,000 choices made in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The show later reveals, in stakes, that she was bitten by the vampire king at the end of her hunting years. So there is a moment of turning, technically, but the powers she carries are the ones she assembled. The bite just made it permanent. She was already, by that point, most of the way there. There's something in that construction that feels deeply personal to the character. She is what she built herself to be, which is both a kind of freedom and a kind of loneliness. No one designed her. She assembled herself from the pieces available. The mirror thing, the inability to see her own reflection, shows up in the show as a practical limitation. She can't check her appearance in conventional ways. She has to ask people, which, for someone whose default mode is not asking people things, probably adds to the general opacity of her relationship with herself. Olivia Olson has said that when she records Marceline's voice lines, she dresses like her, puts on rock boots, maybe some red lipstick, gets into character through the physical act of resembling her, which is a lovely detail and also a reminder that even the person who voices Marceline has to do work to understand who she is from the inside. The show never fully resolves the question of what Marceline is. She's not a clean category. She's a hybrid, a construction, an assemblage. She's over 1,000 years old and still, in some ways, figuring out the answer to the same question she was asking as a 7-year-old in the ruins of a city. Who am I, and why am I here? And does that mean anything? The not knowing is part of the answer. But there's something else the show does with her identity question that I want to name, which is this. Marceline is consistently presented as someone who has been defined by other people's categories, and who has consistently declined to stay in them. She's the heir to the nightosphere, but she doesn't rule it. She's a vampire queen, but she assembled herself into one, which means she chose it, more or less. She's the daughter of an evil demon, but she's not evil, and she knows she's not evil, and she's stopped having to prove it to herself, even if she occasionally still has to prove it to others. The Vampire King, in Stakes, is worth returning to briefly here. He's the final antagonist of the miniseries, and the one Marceline has to ultimately absorb back into herself. But the show gives him something unusual for a villain, a kind of weary dignity. He didn't choose to be the Vampire King any more than Simon chose to be the Ice King. He was shaped by what happened to him. He knows at the end that Marceline is going to win. He accepts it. There's a quality to that confrontation that goes beyond the typical hero defeats villain structure. Marceline is not defeating something external to herself. She's reabsorbing something she externalized. The Vampire King is part of her history. He's part of what she is. Taking him back doesn't make her less herself. It makes her more complete. Which is, in a way, the whole philosophical argument of stakes. You can't get rid of the hard parts of who you are. You can understand them better. You can carry them differently, but they're yours. And that's actually a more generous conclusion than she was healed. Healing suggests something was wrong that was then corrected. What the show gives Marceline is something more like clarification, a better understanding of what she already is. The vampirism is still there. The history is still there. She just knows it more thoroughly now, and that knowing changes how she moves with it. There's a line from one of the analyses we touched on earlier that I keep returning to. Marceline is stuck as a messed up kid, not because she's fundamentally broken, but because the immortality that was supposed to give her time to grow instead kept interrupting the growing. Every time something settled, it changed. Every time she found something worth staying for, it went. So she learned to keep moving instead of learning to stay. Stakes is the show deciding, finally, to let her stay. Even if staying means being the vampire queen again. Even if nothing is resolved in the neat way. She stays. That's the growth. When Marceline first appears, she is evicting Finn and Jake from their home. She doesn't explain why. She doesn't negotiate. She just shows up and informs them with complete confidence that the tree fort belongs to her and they're leaving. She shapeshifts, she looms, she's efficient about it in a way that makes clear she's done this before. She's been moving through the Land of Ooo for centuries, claiming spaces as hers, and then eventually leaving them, and this is just another version of that. Finn and Jake think she's a villain. By the end of the episode, Finn in particular is starting to wonder. She helped him at a crucial moment. She didn't need to. She seemed to enjoy his company, a little, even while maintaining that she wanted him gone. The shift from vaguely antagonistic local vampire to actual close friend happens gradually across the show, and the show earns it. By the time of Simon and Marcy, where she invites both Finn and Jake over to play basketball and then tells them the story of her history with Simon. There's a trust present that didn't exist at the start. She's chosen to share something real with them. That's not a small thing for her. Finn is, in some ways, the most straightforward relationship in Marceline's life. He's a genuinely good person who is still figuring out who he is. He makes mistakes from good intentions and then tries to do better. He's not complicated in the way that Simon and Bubblegum and her father are complicated. He just likes her, and he shows up and he's consistent about it. She respects that, even if she'd never say so in those terms. The show occasionally lets the affection between them be visible. The look on her face at the end of Simon and Marcy, after she's told the story, and the Ice King has scored another basket without understanding any of it, and Finn and Jake are just quietly present with her. She looks tired and sad, and less alone than she was before. That's Finn's contribution, just being there without requiring anything from the being there. Jake's stated character trait for most of the earlier seasons is that he has a fear of vampires. It's played mostly for comedy. Jake is often the voice of comic fear, while Finn charges at things. But in Stakes, it becomes meaningful. He overcomes the fear not through a deliberate act of courage, but through instinct. The moment he sees Marceline get hurt, something shifts, and the fear becomes less important than the fact that she needs help. That's a small moment in a small episode, but it's the kind of moment that tells you everything about how a relationship has changed. The fear was real. It just became less real than she was. The wider found family structure that Marceline has built by the end of the series, Finn, Jake, Bubblegum, and the broader constellation of people who have come to matter, is the show's answer to the question of what you do when your actual family is broken or absent or impossible. You build something else. You find the people who show up and you let them stay. For Marceline, who has been moving her whole life, changing houses, changing locations, avoiding settling, this is a departure. By the end of the original series and through the Distant Lands specials, she stopped moving in the way she was. She has places she returns to. She has people she stays near. The cave house. The same cave house. She keeps it. And it's not that the moving was wrong. The moving was necessary, probably for a long time. Moving is how you survive when staying becomes untenable. It's how you protect yourself from the specific pain of watching the same walls after the person who used to be in them is gone. Marceline moved because she had to, and then she kept moving because it was what she knew, and then gradually, slowly, she stopped. Not because the reasons to move disappeared, because she found reasons to stay that outweighed them. That might seem small. It isn't. For someone who spent 1,000 years in a particular kind of motion, finding a reason to be still is enormous. The show doesn't make a production of this. It just lets you notice it. She stays. That's the whole thing. Right, so let's actually sit with the song. Everything Stays opens like a lullaby. It's in a minor key. Gently, not dramatically minor, the kind of minor that sounds like something heard from a long way away. The melody is simple and circular, the kind that you find yourself remembering before you can explain why. The lyrics, turn away just a moment, let the arms of the garden embrace, feel the sway, that's your gravity. Gravity's just a state of mind. And then, everything stays right where you left it. Everything stays, but it still changes, ever so slightly, daily and nightly, in little ways, when everything stays. The stuffed animal from Sugar's garden, you'll remember it from earlier, bleached on one side, unchanged underneath. Not better or worse. Different. That image is the key. What it describes is this. Things change whether or not you try to hold them still, whether or not you've done anything to them. Even things left entirely alone in the same spot, in the same conditions, are not the same at the end of a year as they were at the beginning. Time moves through them whether or not you want it to. This is the philosophy of the Whole Stakes miniseries, compressed into 2 minutes of music, and it's also, if you look at Marceline's whole arc across the show, the philosophy of her character. She has been trying, in various ways, to hold things still. Her vampirism is the most literal expression of this. She stopped aging, stopped changing in the most visible physical sense, but the things she was trying to preserve, Simon's sanity, her mother's presence, the time before everything fell apart, those changed anyway. They kept changing. Her being frozen didn't stop any of it. The song doesn't say this is wrong. It doesn't say the attempt to hold on is a mistake. It just observes. Things change. Everything changes. That's the nature of things. The change is not failure. The change is just what happens. And yet, and this is the part I find most interesting, things stay. Not unchanged, but present. Still there. The stuffed animal was still in the garden. Simon is still in the world, even if the Simon she knew is gone. Her mother's love was still present, even after her mother wasn't. The world she grew up in is gone, but she's here, a product of it, carrying it, even though it's no longer visible from the outside. In Stakes, the song plays twice. The first time is the scene between Elise and young Marceline, or rather, a dream memory of that scene, since it's a song Marceline is imagining rather than remembering. It's gentle, a mother and a daughter in a moment before everything changed. The second time is at the very end of the mini-series, as the world returns to normal. Marceline is a vampire again. Everything is roughly as it was, and yet something is different in the way she carries herself. Not dramatically different, not a sudden transformation, just slightly more settled, slightly more known to herself. Everything stays, everything changes, both true. There's something I want to dwell on in that pairing, because I think it's more interesting than it first appears. The easy reading is that it's a comforting paradox. Things change, but things also stay, so you don't have to be afraid of change, which is a fine thing to say, and true enough. But the deeper reading, I think, is that things change and things stay aren't actually in tension. They're the same observation, made from two different angles. The stuffed animal changed, and it was still there. These aren't competing facts that need to be balanced against each other. They're both simply what happened. What Marceline has been treating as a loss, the changing, isn't actually a loss in the way she experienced it. Simon changed, irreversibly. That's real. But Simon is also still there, in some form. The Ice King is, in some strange broken way, still Simon. Not the Simon she loved, but the thing that Simon became when the thing that Simon loved survived past Simon's ability to protect it. She's the thing that remained, She's the evidence that Simon mattered, that their time together happened, that the person who pushed a small child across a ruined city in an office chair was real. The song sits at the very center of everything Adventure Time is doing philosophically. The show is about aftermath, about living in the long wake of something catastrophic, in a world remade from the ruins of the old one, about what stays and what changes, and about the wisdom of being able to look at something that has changed and recognize what it still is rather than only what it's no longer. Marceline learns this slowly across the run of the show. She arrives knowing how to survive. She leaves knowing how to stay. I find this a genuinely moving piece of philosophy, and I'm aware that sounds like an odd thing to say about a song from a cartoon. But the best philosophy is often disguised as something else. It arrives sideways in the form of a lullaby or a small memory or a stuffed animal in a garden. It reaches you before you've had time to put your defenses up. Everything Stays is that kind of thing. I want to try to articulate, at the end of all this, what I think Marceline's character is actually about, which is a presumptuous thing to say about something that a team of extraordinary writers spent years carefully developing. I'm just one person who's been thinking about this for a while, but here's where I've landed. Marceline is about surviving things you weren't supposed to survive, and then the question of what you do with that survival. She survived the end of the world. She survived losing her mother in the particular way that she lost her, not to death exactly, but to a silence that looked like abandonment for a millennium. She survived Simon being taken from her by something that neither of them understood and neither of them could stop. She survived centuries of wandering alone through a world that had stopped being designed for anything she could rely on. She survived becoming a vampire by degrees, assembling herself into something capable of continuing. She survived all of it, and at the beginning of the show she is 1,000 years old and still moving through the world with the specific energy of someone who has not yet fully stopped running. The running is understandable. It's even, in a certain light, admirable. You can see it as survival instinct that outlasted the crisis, the thing that kept her alive when the crisis was real, continuing past the point of necessity because it had become muscle memory. She's been doing it for so long, she stopped noticing she's doing it. The moving is just how she is, until it isn't. The show, over its run, is the story of her stopping, of her accumulating reasons to stay, of her turning back toward the things she's been moving away from and deciding finally to face them. Her history with Bubblegum, her understanding of her mother, her relationship to what Simon became, the vampirism she'd been treating as a prison rather than a part of herself. Each of these is a door she'd been walking past. Stakes is the episode where she opens them. Obsidian is what she finds on the other side of the last one. Stakes is the most concentrated version of this, but the whole show is threaded through with it. Even in the early episodes, the ones where she's mostly being mischievous and doing whatever she wants. There's this quality to her that you can read as either confidence or avoidance, depending on the angle. Someone who moves through the world as if nothing really touches her, because she's built very good walls, not because nothing really touches her. The walls are present because they were necessary. A child alone in a post-apocalyptic wasteland needed walls. A teenager hunting vampires for years needed walls. Someone who watched her father figure disappear into a crown needed walls. The walls are understandable. They're also, eventually, the thing that needs to come down. Not entirely, but enough. What I find most honest about the show's handling of her arc is that it doesn't end with her being fixed. She's a vampire again at the end of Stakes. Her father is still complicated. The Simon situation is not resolved by the end of the original series, though Obsidian gives us a glimpse of a future where Simon is restored and that grief finally has a different quality to it. Things are better. They're not resolved. There's a distinction there, and the messed up kid framing, the one from the analysis I mentioned earlier, which describes her as someone who couldn't process what happened to her, is accurate as far as it goes, but it leaves out the other half of the picture. She's also someone who slew all the vampires in the post-apocalyptic world, who built herself into a vampire queen through sheer effort and survival, who made music that said the true things she couldn't say out loud, who found, eventually, people worth staying near. She's both of those things. She's the messed up kid and the 1,000-year-old who has, despite everything, continued. There's something I keep coming back to about why characters like Marceline resonate with people, and I think it's this. She is not defined by her suffering, but her suffering is not erased. Both are present. She carries it and she moves. She doesn't transcend it, the show is too honest for that, but she doesn't disappear under it either. She's still here after 1,000 years of things that should have broken her. That's not glamorous. It's not a superpower. It's just the stubbornness of someone who has, for whatever reason, kept going. There's also something about the specificity of her. The detail that she eats the color red rather than blood. The axe bass she's been playing for a millennium. The parasol on bright days. The cave house she kept. The hambo she held onto across centuries. These are the particulars of a life actually lived, and they give her a texture that a lot of fictional characters lack. She feels inhabited rather than illustrated. The show understood that what makes a character genuinely interesting isn't their power set, or their backstory, or the dramatic events they survive. It's the quality of their presence, the way they move through the world, the specific voice that comes through in how they respond to small things, not just big tragedies. Marceline rolls her eyes at things. She's delighted by the weird. She has a sense of humor about herself, occasionally, that she mostly keeps hidden. She's been pranking people for 1,000 years, and she's still finding it satisfying. That aliveness is what makes her grief work. You need to believe she's genuinely present in the world before the losses register as losses. The show earns every devastating moment by making you care about the person who's living through it first. The show ends with her and Bubblegum together, in the aftermath of the finale, having survived the thing that almost ended everything. It doesn't make a speech about it. It just shows them, present, alive, still in the world. Everything stays, but it still changes, and everything that stayed real. That's Marceline then, or as much of her as I can fit into one night. There's plenty I didn't get to. Her comic series goes into details the show only touches on, and there are threads in the later Distant Lands specials and the Fiona and Cake series that are worth their own explorations. The way her bass turns up in unexpected places across the show's mythology. The detail about her being unable to digest syrup, which I include mainly because I think about it more than I should. The question of what exactly the Mushroom War was, which the show never fully answers, and probably is right not to. The brief, strange appearance of an older alternate universe version of Marceline, voiced by Cloris Leachman. The whole thread with Betty and Simon's eventual reunion, which the show handles with the same careful restraint it applies to most of its most emotional material. If any of those are threads you'd like to follow, the Mushroom War, Simon's full arc, Princess Bubblegum's own complicated philosophy, I do have thoughts about all of them, and there are more of these videos planned. No urgency, they'll be here when you want them. I find her philosophically comforting, which is a strange thing to say about a character and probably warrants a bit of explanation. I think it's because she's evidence that you can carry a great deal and still keep going. Not that carrying it is fine, or that the things that happened were acceptable, or that grief and loss and 1,000 years of complicated family don't leave marks. They do. The show is very clear that they do. But she's still here, playing her bass in her cave, floating around the Land of Ooo, making music about the things she can't say out loud. Staying near the people she loves, in the end, even after everything. The walls came down, not all at once, not perfectly, but enough. She stopped moving long enough to let something take root. She found that the things she most feared, being seen, being known, letting the armor off, didn't destroy her. They just revealed the person who'd been there the whole time. That's not a lesson, it's just what happened over the course of 1,000 years and 8 television seasons, and several specials, and a handful of songs that say the things she couldn't say directly. There's something in that I find worth thinking about late at night.